In the spring of 1950, something unusual happened in a quiet bog in Denmark. Workers were cutting peat, expecting to find only dark soil and roots. Instead, their tools struck something soft but solid. When they looked closer, they saw a human body. The man lay curled on his side, as if asleep. But there was a rope around his neck. His skin looked real. His face still had shape. Even his beard stubble could be seen. At first, it seemed like a recent crime. But then something surprising became clear. This man had been there for more than 2,000 years. Time had passed. Seasons had come and gone. Civilizations had risen and fallen. Yet this body remained, preserved in the quiet stillness of the bog. Even more surprising, the contents of his stomach were still intact. Many years later, scientists carefully studied what he had eaten before he died. They found a simple porridge made from many plants. Dozens of seeds had been ground together. But one plant stood out. It was not rare. It was not exotic. It was something very ordinary. It was a plant that still grows today, often ignored, sometimes removed, and rarely appreciated. You may have seen it growing in cracks in the ground. Near your home. Along the edge of a garden. Most people would call it a weed. And yet, long ago, it was food. Before explaining why this happened, it helps to understand how people once saw this plant. For thousands of years, humans lived close to the land. They observed carefully. They noticed which plants grew easily, which ones returned year after year, and which ones provided steady nourishment. This plant was one of them. It grew wherever soil was disturbed. After rain. After digging. After change. It did not need special care. It did not require rich soil or perfect weather. It simply appeared. And when it appeared, people used it. In early North America, long before modern farming systems, communities collected and stored seeds from this plant. They dried them carefully. They placed them in storage pits. They kept them alongside other important crops. This was not accidental. It was intentional. Over time, they began to shape the plant itself. The wild version had a hard seed coat. It could sit in the soil for many years without growing. But slowly, through patient selection, people encouraged a softer version. This softer seed could sprout more quickly. It could be ground into flour more easily. This is how domestication begins. Not with machines. Not with large tools. But with observation. With patience. With quiet understanding. And this work continued for generations. At the same time, something similar was happening in other parts of the world. In South America, a related plant became known as quinoa. In other regions, similar plants were used in daily cooking. Though the names were different, the idea was the same. People worked with what grew naturally around them. In Europe, this plant remained mostly wild. But it was still used. Travelers carried it. Soldiers ate it. Families included it in simple meals. It was not special in appearance. But it was reliable. That reliability mattered. If a plant grows easily, returns often, and provides nourishment, it becomes part of daily life. And for a very long time, this plant held that place. Even the man found in the bog had eaten it shortly before his death. His final meal reflected the knowledge of his time. This was not unusual. It was normal. But then, something changed. Over time, farming systems began to shift. New crops arrived. Some produced more food in a smaller space. Some stored better. Some became easier to trade. Gradually, older plants were used less. This did not happen all at once. It happened slowly. As new habits formed, old knowledge began to fade. The carefully domesticated versions of certain plants were no longer maintained. Without that care, they disappeared. But the wild forms remained. They continued to grow quietly, just as they always had. Then, many years later, a different kind of change began. In the mid-1900s, new products were introduced to manage land more easily. These products were designed to remove unwanted plants. They worked by targeting broadleaf plants while leaving grass behind. At first, this seemed helpful. Lawns became more uniform. Gardens became easier to control. Certain plants were labeled as undesirable. And this particular plant, once used for food, was placed into that category. Over time, this idea became widely accepted. If it grew where it was not expected, it was removed. If it appeared in a garden, it was pulled out. If it returned, stronger measures were used. Slowly, the plant's identity changed. Not because the plant itself had changed, but because human perception had. At the same time, food systems were becoming more complex. Leafy greens like spinach and lettuce became widely available. They were grown in large quantities, transported long distances, and sold in stores. This made them easy to access. But it also created distance between people and the growing process. Food was no longer something you noticed growing nearby. It became something you purchased. And so, plants that grew freely lost their place in daily life. Even though they required no effort, they were no longer seen as useful. This is where the story becomes interesting. Because while this plant was being removed from gardens, its qualities remained the same. It still grew easily. It still returned each year. It still contained valuable nutrients. But these qualities were no longer part of the conversation. Instead, attention shifted to what was packaged, labeled, and sold. Over time, knowledge that had once been common became rare. People forgot how to recognize the plant. They forgot how to prepare it. They forgot that it had ever been food at all. And yet, it never disappeared. It continued to grow in quiet places. Along fence lines. Near pathways. At the edges of fields. Wherever soil was disturbed, it returned. If you look closely, you may notice its leaves. They are soft. Slightly shaped like a diamond. Green on top. If you turn a leaf over, you may see a light coating, almost like a fine dust. This is a natural part of the plant. It is one of the small details that helps identify it. When the plant is young, it is tender. At this stage, it can be used much like other leafy greens. Simple preparation is enough. A brief boil. A gentle sauté. Nothing complicated. In different parts of the world, people still use it this way. In some places, it is added to flatbreads. In others, it is mixed with eggs. In others, it is cooked with spices. These traditions have continued quietly, even as others faded. And this shows something important. Not all knowledge disappears at the same time. Some of it remains, carried by small groups, passed from one generation to the next. But for many people, this plant is still unfamiliar. Or if it is familiar, it is seen in a different way. This brings us back to the idea of observation. Gardening often encourages action. Watering. Planting. Removing. Adjusting. But sometimes, understanding comes from simply watching. Seeing what grows without effort. Noticing patterns. Recognizing which plants return again and again. These observations can change how we think about a space. Instead of seeing only what we planned, we begin to notice what appears on its own. And sometimes, those unexpected plants have a story. A long one. One that connects past and present. The man in the bog lived in a time when this plant was part of daily life. His final meal reflected that. Today, that same plant may grow quietly nearby, unnoticed. This contrast can feel surprising. How can something so common also be so overlooked? The answer often lies in habit. When something is labeled in a certain way, we tend to accept that label. If a plant is called a weed, we treat it as one. We remove it. We ignore it. We do not question it. But labels can change. And sometimes, it helps to pause and look again. Not every plant that appears uninvited is without value. Some are simply misunderstood. Of course, it is always important to be careful. Not all wild plants are safe to eat. Proper identification matters. Local conditions matter. And it is always wise to learn gradually, with patience. But the larger idea remains. The garden is not only a place of control. It is also a place of discovery. Sometimes, what we remove without thinking could have been something useful. Sometimes, what we overlook has a deeper history. And sometimes, stepping back allows us to see more clearly. Near the end of this story, it is worth returning to that quiet museum display. The preserved face of the man still rests behind glass. Visitors look at him and read about his life, his time, and his final meal. It is a simple connection across centuries. A reminder that human lives, though separated by time, are linked by shared experiences. Food is one of those connections. The same plant he ate still grows today. It has not changed its nature. Only our relationship with it has changed. If you're comfortable sharing, I'm curious whether you've ever noticed this kind of plant in your own garden, and what you usually do when it appears. There is no right or wrong answer. Only observation. Only awareness. And perhaps, over time, a small shift in perspective. Because sometimes, the garden improves not when we do more, but when we begin to notice more. Sometimes the most familiar things are the ones we understand the least. And sometimes, the quiet plants growing at our feet are carrying stories much older than we realize. Sometimes the garden improves when we simply step back and observe.